Hey guys, welcome back. So now with jumping back into King in Black and getting into part 2 of the Daredevil tie-in, The Black Kitchen, Matt Murdock's dance with the devil, if you will, alongside with Elektra's attempt to do things like Daredevil, like they make for a very compelling story. And really, like, these King in Black tie-ins have been going hard. Man, like some bangers came out today. So let's get into it. But first, if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to catch the spills every week. And don't forget to hit that bell up top so we can squat up in the comments for the first hour. Alright, so when we jump in, we pick up with Mayor Wilson Fisk, who's been evacuated to his safe room, and while he's here, he's getting updates about the numbers of Avengers that have fallen. And just as a reminder, like within this tie-in, we're roughly around the time before Dylan started freeing people. And like even with that, like when Dylan does, it doesn't get too much better shortly after. But then it's here also where Mayor Fisk mentions that he had gotten word from Tony Stark to evacuate the city. But Wilson Fisk didn't take heed to it initially because he had thought it was some type of trick in order to make him appear foolish. And though we don't get it here like in this issue, and we probably won't see it within the Daredevil series at all, but over in Thunderbolts we will see a bit more of Wilson Fisk's response to action, and rightfully so, because when he starts putting the team together, like that then becomes a whole story in its own. But then it's also here where he's getting fed information from one of his assistants, to where he then asks them, like, where's Typhoid Mary? Because she has sacrificed her life in order for him to even make it this far. But at this time also, when we jump over to Elektra, who's protecting Alice from her mother and Typhoid Mary, and at this time her and Alice are cornered. And it's here where we kind of get this moment where Mary is like she'll kill the both of them, but the only one on her list, which is more so Knull's list, it's you, Daredevil. And Elektra just kind of looks at her thinking like, man, this girl must be blind as a mat. And I'm paraphrasing, of course, but when Mary says this, it sets off a few things in motion, because for one, it lets Elektra know that Knull wants Daredevil, but also this sets off Alice's mother, who's also been taken into the hive, and it causes her to attack Mary. And this gives Elektra and Alice a chance to run for it, which Elektra mainly uses to create some safe space for Alice, but by all means her intentions are to stay in Hell's Kitchen and find a way to put this fire out, because beyond the immediate threat, she has to see this Daredevil thing through. But then it's also here where we jump over to Matt, or more so his codex, within the void going back and forth with Knull. And it's crazy to see not only the conversation, but also the way that Matt combats the influence of Knull. Because when most others make contact with one of Knull's symbiotes and they're taken into the void, they're initially overwhelmed by the darkness, and from there Knull uses that leverage, or in some cases uses the symbiote to use the leverage of that person's shock of being in darkness and disconnection from the world, and he just puppets their bodies to do whatever mayhem that he would cause them to believe. But in the case of Matt, like he's been in the dark for a while now. And in his case, it's pretty cool to see that there's a couple reasons why Knull just can't get a grip on him so quickly. And it's interesting because even in the case of Matt, who goes by the name of Daredevil, which is a name that he initially got from being bullied so much in school, but even with that being the case of him going by that name, for one, Matt is spiritual nonetheless, and it's here where he meets Knull, he refers to him as truly being the devil, and Matt ain't trying to go that route. But then on top of that, what's crazy is like with Matt mentally fighting to hold on, he's then also able to physically fight as well, which Knull then finds super impressive. And Knull tells Matt that there are a few that he has encountered who have been able to do this. And for me, like one of the first people who come to mind is the Silver Surfer, who had combat Knull with light, but in this case with Matt Murdock, it's a very different situation, because in his case, he knows how to navigate his way in the dark. And it's just crazy to see how this translates with Matt in the Abyss, because it almost feels like a bit of what Rex had mentioned about any individual who had worn a symbiote for a long time, to where in that case they can navigate better in the hive. And it's like here in the case of Matt, the place where he has the best chance of fighting Knull off is the Abyss, which like we've seen in the issues of Venom, you gotta go through the Abyss to get to the hive. And like it's kind of funny just thinking of the practicality of it, because if you think about it, like Knull, he's trying to get Matt through the Abyss and connect him to the hive, but he just won't connect. And Knull's response to this is like, yeah, this is impressive. But I can only imagine that he's a bit frustrated at the same time with Matt's unique skill set, but also with this happening and Knull trying to get deeper into Matt's mind. Knull tells Matt, like usually when people try to resist Knull, like it comes from a place of false hope. And Knull says this is why when certain people pass and they go to your version of heaven, but when this happens, you cry because you truly don't believe in it. And Matt tells him like, no, you are completely wrong. Like when he weeps and wails, it's not because he doesn't believe that, but rather it's because deep down Matt doesn't believe that he's worthy of God's love. And like in its entirety, like I cannot get over how crazy it is that Matt has like the perfect combination of mindset and superpowers to where he can just dodge Knull in the abyss so graciously. Cause when doing this, he may not know Knull's system like we do to this point, but if he ever gets into the hive, then at that point it's a wrap for him like everybody else. So for now, he's still like in the lobby spamming the refresh button. But then from here we jump over to Elektra, and in her case, like she's still trying to figure out like what to do in order to end this. And in the case of Elektra, it's not so much the thought of how to stop this invasion or how to clear the whole city of all the symbiotes, but instead in her case, it's like trying to figure out how to end this without going on a killing spree. Like in this case where she takes down Typhoid Mary, like that could have killed her, but instead for Elektra, she figures since these people are bonded, she's seen that they can take a bit more, so she tries to buy herself some time. But even at this point, after taking down Mary, or at the least getting her out of the way for the time being, but then you had the case where Elektra, she hears Alice screaming from inside this construction site, and when she goes in, she sees Alice is grabbed by her mother, and immediately Elektra's like, okay, how do I stop this? Like, what would Matt do? Or in other words, how do I de-escalate this without catching a body? And as soon as she says that, Typhoid Mary comes straight through, impaling Alice's mother. And when this happens, I imagine Elektra just thinking like, whew, one down, one to go. Because at this point, Mary came through with the what would Elektra do type of solution. But also in this case, Elektra notices that Mary, she got an upgrade. And I mean, Mary said it too. She's like, thanks for the upgrade, no? But even at this point, like Elektra, she's come to the conclusion to where she realizes that the best way to do things, it may not be like the exact way that Matt would do it. Because in the case of Matt, if he were in this same situation, he would likely just keep fighting and fighting and fighting until he was blue in the face. And for Elektra to prove what she needs to prove and really accomplish the meaning of why she stepped in as the current Daredevil, she doesn't have to do things the same way that Matt does. And though she doesn't need to go all the way to what Elektra would do as far as fully thinking like a trained assassin, but what she can do is use her skills and her strengths to her advantage. And the way she does it in this moment, she plays it very smart here. Because when Mary knocks Elektra out of the building, Elektra does what Elektra would do, not what Daredevil would do. Because when Mary knocks Elektra out of the building and Elektra lands on top of this car, Elektra holds her breath and she stops her heart, which had then caused Mary to believe that she was dead. And after that, Mary went on to go after Wilson Fisk. And it was pretty clutch because Elektra, she just didn't have the means to win that fight. But then after she gets up, she takes a minute to console Alice, who had just lost her mother. And it really feels like in this moment, Elektra saw herself in Alice, and it reminding her of when she had lost her mother when she was younger. But then it's also here where we jump back to Matt, who has Knull telling him to just give in and telling Matt that he's a man of contradictions, but Matt lets Knull know that he's more than just that man, he's Daredevil. And with saying this, he incapacitates the two guards, but with doing so, he's then attacked by the other guards, who I guess are just profiling because he got horns. But with Matt taking down the two guards who had the Knull symbiotes on them, Knull pulls back those symbiotes saying that they're needed elsewhere. But even in this moment with Matt having a symbiote on, Knull still has a connection to him and he's still able to communicate with Matt. And with doing so, he really tries to play with Matt's head here. Because even though Matt's fighting off all these guards, he's essentially trying to protect them. But Knull kind of plays into the idea that this is just Matt taking out some of his rage. And that confuses Matt for a little bit. And mainly because with going back to the whole concept of Matt taking on the name Daredevil, he had got that name from being picked on as a kid, and partially because he wouldn't fight back. And that was mainly because his father was a fighter, and he wanted Matt and his brother to get their education and be better than him. And because of that, when Matt was picked on, he didn't fight back. But in his early years before his training, he would sneak around in his dad's gym and practice on those punching bags to let out that frustration. So when Knull tells Matt that this is Knull's strength, his frustration, his power flowing through Matt, it conflicts Matt because he kind of feels like the devil is flowing through him. And on top of that, when his friend Marcus tells him like, dude, what you waiting on? There's a hole in the wall, go. And then Matt's even further conflicted because he's thinking like, well, do I leave? Or does he stay there and stick with the solution of why he allowed himself to go to prison in the first place? But when this happens, Matt, he doesn't go for the opening, he doesn't run for it, but instead he goes deeper into the prison, breaking through the glass door, making his way to the execution chamber to where he breaks in hopes of using the electric chair to get this symbiote off of him like it worked on the guard earlier. Because at this point, Matt's been putting up a fight for a while, but at this point he is struggling, and just before he can pull the lever, there's like this dead silence and Matt just says, no. Because inside of the void, he sees Knull. And it's crazy because this is the moment where you know Knull is here because he's about to manually handle the situation. Like he had to come all the way down from corporate because everything that Matt is doing here in the void, in step one, like it shouldn't be possible. But when Knull arrives here, he tells Matt like no one can truly fight forever, except because there is an exception. You know, to pretty much every rule, there's an exception. And Knull tells him like no one can fight forever except those who live forever. But just before Knull can take Matthew into the hive, Matthew then sees Marcus just outside the little window, which is also crazy with Matt just fighting in 2 different worlds at the same time. But when Matt sees Marcus, he kind of gives him this look and he tells Knull, like in response to no one can fight forever. Matt then tells Knull, like, I believe, so I will live. And right then Marcus pulls the lever, and I guess Marcus was kind of like, oh, that's the one-liner, that's my cue. But with pulling the lever, they shock the symbiote, ripping it off of Matt's body and setting him free from Knull's grip. And really, all in all, like with Matt doing this, he really took the high road here. Because at the end of the day, if he were to have left the prison, and regardless of his intentions, it would have taken away for the reason that he allowed himself to come to prison in the first place, if he were to break out without being acquitted. But then on top of this, you also have Mayor Fisk, who's come to the point to where he's tired of hiding in his safe room, and he's just become anxious, saying that someone needs to do something, and someone needs to take action. And because of that, he just ups and leaves, even though his advisors and his security said he should do otherwise. But because they all scared of him, didn't nobody do nothing. And as a result, Wilson Fisk just walked out of the safe room, which as we know from here is also going to put him in the sights of Typhoid Mary. And so now real quick, I want to give a special shout out to all the Patreons. Thank you guys for all your support. And for anyone who's new here who wants more information on how to support the channel, I got a link below so you can go to patreon.com/dopespill. But that'll do it for this one, guys. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and let me know what you guys think about Daredevil using his powers to kind of dance around Knull in the void and stall while in the void, avoiding the hive. But let me know your thoughts in the comments below or over on Discord, and we'll do it again in the next one. Alright, later.